While this is being set up, I would like to thank John and Nati for the kind invitation, and Namrata as well. It's always a pleasure to present at the AEGC, and I'm sure it's going to, as John alluded to, it is going to take greater heights over the near future. When I had provided the topics, I had written it as genomics of complex eye diseases in Asia. Since Takeshi has already briefed about it, I will not dwell too much on it, but rather I'll talk of the Indian context. I also understand Kumar is going to present an overview of the same, so I'll restrict to certain specific diseases and the context thereof. So if we look into how the ocular genetics has evolved in India, the initial strategies that used linkage mapping and candidate gene screening, there were major diseases like retinitis pigmentosa, congenital cataract, primary congenital glaucoma, corneal dystrophies, and you can see the list of organizations who were initially involved. Then came in the era of association studies after candidate gene screening, and then the complex diseases were looked into, followed by GWAS, or the genome-wide association studies, and now the next generation sequencing. And these are some of the efforts that I have listed, some of the major efforts that are listed here, but I'm sure there are other groups who are also working in the same area. So there has been a continuous evolution, and what has facilitated that, as again, John in his introductory slide, I think kind of briefed upon this, that this is majorly to do with the clinical heterogeneity across different regions in terms of clinical presentation and disease severity. And that is why India happens to be a gold mine for genomic studies. And obviously there is infrastructure and logistics like trained personnel, large families, and most importantly for genetic studies, the typical autosomal recessive pedigrees, well-defined epidemiological cohorts, and access to clinical materials. One of the things that I would like to emphasize is that among the eye institutes, there is also sort of clinician-scientist interactions that actually have facilitated to all of this. So what we are looking into are different forms of genes or alleles within the genes that cause an eye disease. We are looking into inherited or Mendelian forms that Takeshi talked about, where we are looking into mutations which are rare alleles, which has a very large effect size but are very rare in the populations, all the way to common variants which are implicated by genome-wide association studies and even by next-gen sequencing nowadays, where we are looking into complex diseases which are not implicated by one gene, but there are multiple genes with varying magnitudes of effect. So you would have large number of variants in different genes, and obviously it will have a low effect size but a higher frequency. And then there is also a class of intermediate alleles with intermediate frequencies. I'll talk about two of such complex diseases and two of congenital diseases where we have made some efforts. One is AMD, and I do not need to introduce to this audience what AMD means, but the point that I would like to emphasize is obviously there is a process of physiological aging, but when it is coupled with genetic risk factors and other environmental risk factors, the prevalence of AMD goes up. And we have shown over the years that major candidate genes like the complements, like the genes in the chromosome 10 regions, like the ARMS2, etc., are similarly involved in the Indian cohort like what you have in the other cohorts. And if you look into the effects of those alleles, like for the complement factor H or the LOC, they obviously have a stronger effect compared to other genes. We also showed that across, and this is one of the works that Takeshi presented yesterday, that there is another region within chromosome 10 which harbors two different regions, the HTRA and the ARMS2, and between that there has always been a difficulty in dissecting this region, and there happens to be an insertion deletion that is also kind of prevalent not only in Indian populations but across different populations worldwide. When we do a meta-analysis, this was part of a global consortium where global AMD consortium, where we did a meta-analysis to show that these complements behave in a way which is similar across other populations, like complement 3, which is associated with risk, and complement factor B and C2, which are involved in protection. And the effects actually happens to be similar across different regions. Now, what happens when you take this in a population mode? So with help of Vinay Nangia, we were involved in the Central Central India Eye and Medical Study, which is the CMS cohort. And what you see is when you type all this across the Central India Eye and Medical cohort, you see that it doesn't show up in cases of early AMD. So most of these genes, so across phenotypes, there are different alleles which attribute to the phenotype. So the study is almost similar to other population-based cohort like from Germany, Latino, etc. And also the INDI study where Sundar was involved. If we now take all this data together and type a population attributable risk, so across complement factor H, if you have one allele, as opposed to if you have multiple alleles, one can then easily type what the risk would be. But that, since that doesn't explain all AMD, so we took on to genome-wide association studies, mapped other genes, and what we have found over a period of time is that it is not only the complement, but there are variations in extracellular matrix genes like TIMP, etc., which were also showed in the NEI cohort led by Anand Swarup, and we kind of replicated the same. This was published in PNS. Turning to, again, glaucomas, there are large number of loci that have been mapped, as you can see, and only a few genes have been characterized as these locus. What Takeshi showed is that we have to move out from this mapping strategy and move on to whole exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing, which will actually get rid of all this, but we will populate this column more frequently if we go with the NGS approach of doing a whole exome sequencing. In Indian scenario, although LOX-L1 with not only primary open angle glaucoma, but with exfoliation syndrome has been kind of replicated, and this was done in during Kumar's time, I suppose. But there are a lot of studies where we do not find a similar replication across the other regions, other candidate regions, that implying that there might be several other variants that might be involved in the Indian scenario. We showed, we actually did a number of these studies where we actually could not find a replication, and we show that in the Indian scenario, there is a different mechanism when we go by functional assessment of these global genes. We show that not only in the inflammatory genes, but there are extracellular matrix genes, which when you characterize based on their effect in the aqueous humors and glaucoma, you do find that the TIMP inhibitors, for instance, show a greater degree of association. And with these TIMPs, if you subcategorize glaucoma patients based on their response to therapy, you see that those who have not responded to therapy, the MMP level goes down, TIMP level goes up, and so there are evidences of other genes. I'll just quickly switch gears and talk about primary congenital glaucoma, and that happens to be closer to our heart because of the prevalence of the disease. These are autosomal recessive. This is an autosomal recessive disease, and the prevalence is 1 in 3,300 in the state of Andhra Pradesh, the undivided state of Andhra Pradesh, and which is similar to somewhere among the Middle Eastern populations, Slovakian gypsies, etc. And that happens to be because of the fact that this is an autosomal recessive disease. Even in this state, you have a lot of consanguineous practices, and that increases the prevalence. 2 chromosomal regions have so far been, 4 chromosomal regions have been mapped, 2 have been characterized. One harbors the cytochrome P450 CYP1B1, the other a gene called LTBP2. And when you see the mutation spectrum worldwide, we actually collated the data from other populations based on our bilateral programs, like from Brazil, Tunisia, etc. What we find is that there is a global frequency distribution across single genes, implying that there are other genes which may be leading to the phenotype. And if you see, even with respect to the prevalent mutations, there are certain segments, like for instance in the Middle Eastern population, they share certain mutations which are not replicated in other populations. What happens to LTBP2? If you do it in a similar way, you find that LTBP2 again doesn't show much involvement in the Indian, whether it is a South Indian population or the North Indian population. This is a study from AIIMS. And but while it does show some evidence in terms of Pakistani populations, the gypsies, and the Iranian populations, indicating there are other genes. So with respect to CYP1B1, there is a signature that no matter which population you come from, If you harbor a mutation, it's always on a common signature or haplotype, and this runs across mutations identified in CYP1B1 but not in LTBP2. We've showed that functionally CYP1B1 is more important, since in the promoter region there is a variant which is functionally associated with CYP1B1. If you knock down that functional region, the activity of the CYP1B1 reduces by 90%, but more importantly, it hampers the binding of several other transcription factors which are involved in development. This promoter variant segregates with the signature of the haplotype in the coding region, and if you follow these children over a period of time who harbors this variation, following surgery, over a period of time they do not recover their IOP. Their intraocular pressure remains high, and the eye goes into phthisis and finally to blindness, as opposed to those who do not have the variation. So these are functional studies, again, where India has taken some kind of lead because of the population prevalence. We have also shown that across different genes that are bound to CYP1B1 promoter, other genes like the FOXY1, for instance, may segregate in some families, but over a period of time, if you follow these phenotypes, they do not develop any kind of neovascularization. So FOXY1 phenotypes, again with CYP1B1, may not be an essential candidate for the disease. We did some genome-wide association studies, runs of homozygosity, and as Takeshi alluded to, we did exome sequencings of these families just because of the nature of the families. And what we found is that there are specific genes which replicate in families. We have shown that over through pathway analysis, and that might hold clue to genes other than CYP1B1 that would cause primary congenital glaucoma. I'll talk more about it at ARVO. And now coming to the last disease, which is retinopathy of prematurity, again an important condition in the Indian scenario. And this is the prevailing hypothesis that prematurity leads to incomplete retinal vasculature, leading to hypoxia that causes imbalance of angiogenic and anti-angiogenic molecules, leading to neovascularization. But that doesn't explain the question that why then some cases regress automatically. Our hypothesis is that there is a genetic predisposition whereby there is upregulation or downregulation of these angiogenic regulators, and followed by degradation of the extracellular matrix and vascular invasion that leads to neovascularization. We showed that by a multitude of genomic and proteomic approaches. When we typed genes, we found that there are complements and extracellular matrix genes that are strongly associated, and this also expresses very significantly in the vitreous of ROP babies. When you do a proteomic profiling, you see that between cases and controls, you find the activation of complement 3. We also showed complement 5 in both gels in reducing and non-reducing condition, but you don't see in the normal controls. Based on mass spec analysis, we also showed that these complements are strongly activated. And so our hypothesis now is that those complements activate macrophages, which in turn activate the angiogenic molecule. This we showed through some other functional assays following ECM degradation leading to angiogenesis. So that's currently our hypothesis. So finally, what the future holds? The future holds not only in identifying genes, but the way you approach a disease per se. And this was one of the efforts of NEI and the DBT, the initial effort when Kumar was in Shankar Nethralaya. And this was an effort where they tried to bring in some quantitative traits leading to a disease phenotype. So they would characterize families, consanguineous families. They would screen the whole genome that associates with certain quantitative traits involved with particular diseases. So currently the efforts, I think, are led by Ronnie and Vijaya, who is in the audience. And the reason for that happens to be the fact that quantitative traits show a greater degree of replication compared to the normal disease phenotype. And there are several genes which are associated with certain quantitative traits like optic disc, central corneal thickness, cup to disc ratio, etc., that finally define a disease. We are also following a similar trend with one of our epidemiological cohorts, the Andhra Pradesh eye disease study cohort, where we had quantified subjects with quantitative traits. Now we are trying to understand over a 17-year period how many of them progress to a disease with the quantitative trait, how many still have the trait but not the disease, how many are normal. And since we are doing a complete genomic profiling using NGS across these groups, we are trying to identify functional QTLs that might be possible biomarkers for risk or progression. Another area where India has not taken much lead, we have done some preliminary works, is the genomic of host susceptibility to acquired infections. We have shown that there are certain signatures in toll-like receptor genes, in defenses, etc., whereby individuals become more susceptible to certain forms of infection. So this is another area that can be tried out. So finally, under the AEGC would not only provide the genomics for risk prediction, but it also needs to be coupled with proteomics, the transcriptomics, which will facilitate biomarker discovery, provide diagnostic tests, and along with the clinical parameters, it will provide an integrated management for better diagnosis and prognosis. So finally, what we hope to achieve during the AEGC across common diseases is that when a patient enters a clinic, can we actually accurately predict the disease? Can we accurately kind of enumerate the risk, which would lead to some form of a personalized medicine or some form of lifestyle changes that will help in a better prevention? So I thank, because there is a long list, I couldn't list everyone, all the students and postdocs, clinicians, scientists, and collaborators everywhere. The work which I presented over the last 15 years, what we have been doing, has been supported by all the funding agencies of the Government of India, the Champaliman Foundation of Portugal, and the NIH through their R01 grants. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubha, for that.